2023 Hope Advisory Board meeting, going over a membership update. Close that. There are 2 new members who will be joining next month. Ilea Schaefer works with Unity Shelter and also a variety of community partners doing direct client support. And Matt Easdale, not related to Dan Easdale that I know of, but he's a recent graduate and also part of some underrepresented communities. And so they will be joining us next month. So there are 20 total members and room for 1 more. There has been an application from someone in the community who works closely with families experiencing homelessness, and the Hope Executive Committee will review it next month. Okay, so next slide. We'll go ahead and do roll call and the July meeting minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? I sent them out on Friday. Anyone attending virtually have changes to the meeting minutes? And Paula, thank you again for taking them. There's a lot of discussion last time. We can entertain a motion to approve your July minutes as is.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Kate. Is there a second? Second. Andrea seconds. Thank you. Catherine, are you with us virtually?
I am. Can you hear me all right?
You sure can. Do you approve the minutes from
Great.
last time?
I do. Approved.
Thank you. Carol?
I approve.
Thanks. Alice? I didn't see Alice join. Okay, Ricardo is excused. Ryan?
I am here. I had to sustain for the notes because I missed last meeting due to a fire.
Well, I'm glad you're here and you can abstain from the minutes vote. Thanks for taking the time. Kate?
Here and approved.
Thank you. Anita?
Here and approve.
Matt is excused this evening. He, like about 6 other people, is real sick. Joel? And I know Joel had a conflict tonight. I think he was joining about 15 minutes late and had to leave about 45 minutes early. So once he joins, we can note that he's here, but he can abstain from the minutes vote. Aaron?
Here and approved.
Ari?
Here and abstain.
Barbara?
Here and approved.
Melissa is no longer on the board. Bria?
Here and approve.
Thank you. Cindy is on a much deserved vacation for quite some time. She's back in September. Charles? Peggy?
Hear and approve, and I just want to say that I just got a notice that my home area is being evacuated due to a fire, so I'm going to go off and go home. And if everything is fine, I'll log back on. If it's not fine, I'll talk to y'all later.
Oh my gosh, Peggy, we will be thinking of you.
Alrighty, thank you. Bye-bye.
Maybe in the car. Andrea?
Here and abstain.
And Ilea is not here this evening. Nancy is also excused. Your meeting minutes pass. Oh, wow. Peggy's okay. I just need to take a moment for that. She lives up in the Salem area.
Oh, okay. I was like, is she close by? Like, I didn't know if it was like Eugene or.
No, it's the Salem area. Do any of our other board members need to check in on anything with fire evacuations just north of here?
Where does Peggy live?
She's in the Salem area.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, well, this might be an interesting conversation. It will be more Linn County and Benton County focused. The crux of our meeting tonight was going to be about regional coordination and updates. We are in this tri-county area of Linn, Benton, and Lincoln. But Karen Rockwell and her whole team are dealing with an outbreak in their office and not able to attend. That was very last minute as of lunchtime. And now Peggy, who was going to be giving the Lincoln County update, has had to go. So it might be focused more on Linn and on Benton, although Teresa, I'm glad you are here to provide some input about IHN perspective over the Tri-County area. So first we can start with introductions of folks who are here. I'll pass it over to you, Eric.
I'm Eric Anderson. I'm the emergency manager for the Linn County Health Services.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And is Shane Sanderson joining?
He's not able to make it.
Okay, that is just fine. And Sarah Hartstein or Jonna, are you filling in for her?
I'm here. I don't think Sarah's on right now, but yes, I am filling in then. Thank you.
Would you introduce yourself and describe your role?
Yes, my name is Jonna Peters, pronoun she, her, and I'm the CHA or Regional Health Assessment, Regional Community Health Improvement Plan epidemiologist with kind of working with the partnership of community health and with Benton County. And I'm just here to observe some updates about some HOPE priorities and goals that are going on that we can maybe integrate into our work groups coming up. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonna. Teresa, hi.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for letting me be here today. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the manager of social determinants and transformation for IHN CCO.
Thanks for being here. We wanted this to be less of a presentation county by county and more of like a coffee talk discussion. Like we haven't seen each other for a while. It's been a long summer. We've done a lot. What is going on? How are you? What's happening? But for some discussion questions to kick us off, and then I'll stop screen sharing so you can see everybody. We really wanted to kind of share in Linn, Benton, and Lincoln who is coordinating? Like, what is the role? Is it your county health department? Is it your housing authority? Because in Lincoln and Benton counties, we were part of House Bill 4123, this pilot. And so we are coordinating with that staff capacity. In Linn County, there's a multi-agency council coming from the executive order. So the coordination is going that route. We'd also love to get to a discussion about House Bill 5019. All three of our counties in this region are part of the rural Oregon continuum of care. We had to identify top subpopulations where there's some lessons learned from that. And then as we go, sharing any main progress updates, successes that you've had, or biggest hurdles. I don't want to just only dwell on the hurdles because there's so many, so successes too. And then opportunities for regional coordination or leveraging collective impact in this Tri-County area. We have the regional community health improvement planning process that's identifying affordable housing and homelessness as one of the top 3 or 4 priority areas. And then Peggy was going to talk to us about continuum of care status and becoming our own continuum of care. So these are just to sort of launch us off. And I can stop screen sharing so that we can see folks. And Eric, if you're okay, I'd love to start with you to kind of hear what's going on in Linn County.
Yep. I'll start off by saying that Peggy has a lot more knowledge on this whole thing than I do. I'm new to this realm of things. So I've been trying to get up to speed since I've been dealing with this since March-ish. So a little bit of history about us with Linn County is that when the governor made her executive order number 2 back in January, she listed out a bunch of counties within the state. And then she said that if you were not listed in the counties and if you want to be included in the list, then you can go through and there's certain criteria you had to meet, and then you had to declare a state of emergency at the local level, and then you'd be included. And so Linn County, we met the threshold, and our commissioners declared a state of emergency. And then we were accepted by the governor, executive order, I think it was number 9 for the year. She did accept us. And so we thought what that was going to do was it was going to include us into the pot of funding that the governor originally set aside for those counties. And unfortunately, it did not. So it's weird though, is that when we were included, one of the things that was required of us was to establish a multi-agency coordination group at the county level. And so we did. And then we just been running with it, trying to figure out exactly where we fall. And it's kind of weird is that We are still included in the governor's declaration way back when, the first one, but yet at the same time as we're being pushed into the new House Bill 5019 group as well. And so a lot of our funding, all of our funding is coming from the 5019.
Eric, I want to adjust this camera to make sure that folks at home can see you. And I feel like turning it a little bit might help. Go ahead and keep talking
There we
again.
go. No,
Other way.
Other way.
Or no. You got it
raise a little bit more.
There you
Yeah,
go.
there we go. Well, no, it switched it up again.
Try
It
again.
doesn't like me. That's a good thing, I guess.
I feel like, yeah, there you go.
No? You removed. Okay, no? That's weird.
I'm gonna try going this way.
Okay. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, there you go.
Sort of.
So it takes a while.
I'm close.
A lot of us are talking, so it's
All
hard
right.
to make a decision.
Okay, just Eric.
Okay, so, you know, we're moving on and we're trying to figure out exactly where we fall into place with the governor's office and then Oregon, Housing and Community Services, community services, and then Oregon Office of Emergency Management, Department of Emergency Management's involved with it too. The most challenging part so far for me, at least, is there are so many state agencies involved with this. You know, my background, I've been working in emergency management since 2011, all hazards emergency management, and then back in 2020, I got hired by the health department and organized the health department's response to COVID. And so, what's weird is this executive order, the state of emergency is very unique on the way that the state handles emergencies. This isn't normal for the emergency to be handled this way. So OEM, Office of Emergency Management, does have a hand in it, but they don't have the overall control, the overall span of control of what's going on. And so it's just challenging because there's 3 different agencies involved. And the rules.
And go ahead and use it.
Okay, no worries. And so, the rules change frequently. The funding, has been all over the board as to how much we're gonna get and what we need to do. And so when there's a hoop to jump through, we jump through the hoops, we fill out the applications, we send in the forms, we do everything we're supposed to be doing. And then we wait. And so one of the things that they wanted us to provide is that they wanted to have us we accepted project proposals from Linn County agencies to find out exactly what's on their needs list or wish list. And we got over $7 million back of requests.
Was this for the executive order or for the most recent HB 15?
The most recent.
Yeah.
And so we got over 7 million, and then we were told by the state that we're only getting roughly a little over 1.5 million. And so it's pretty difficult to move forward. So you have to really basically take a good holistic approach to everything as to what's most important. And you have to look at everything from the top down. And that's one thing that I have done in this position is that, you know, I don't have, I'm a new guy coming in. I'm looking at everything from the 30,000 foot level, and there's a lot of agencies out there. There's a lot of resources that are out there. There's a lot of things that we're doing from an individual agency standpoint within the county. But what's concerning to me is that there's coordination, collaboration going on behind the scenes, like meetings like this. There's a lot of stuff, conversations happening, but at the end of the day, when a homeless individual presents themselves at a shelter or a place to get assistance, the balls get dropped. And there's people that get left behind, and there's people that fall through the cracks. And so the goal for me is to identify, and we're still doing this, identify every single agency out there that is serving the homeless individuals. Find out exactly who they are, what services they provide, what in an ideal world, what would they want to provide, the ideal client, and then kind of formulate that into a plan so that if somebody present themselves, say at one of the local homeless shelters, and they show up and say, I need housing, and then we do an assessment on the individual, and we come to find out that individual will be better served at, say, another shelter within the area. Let's transfer that person from this shelter to that shelter, and then they can be better served and get better services. That, for what I know, has not happened until now. And so trying to make sure that everybody is providing the best services as possible, but also from a organizational standpoint, from an agency standpoint, like I was telling one of them last week, that imagine having the only clients that you want to provide services to. Like if you were to pick the cream of the crop of the clients, which one would you rather have? We want this type. Well, imagine being able to focus 100% on those type of clients. And the ones that you are not geared for would go someplace else, and then they would be better served there. So everybody, from what I've talked to, what I've heard is that they're all on board. They're excited to move forward as a group. They're excited to, really kind of function as a team, I guess you'd say. And so, the goal of the MAC group is to not take over direction or take over, any specific agency or organization, but to really work better as a team from a county approach. And so, yeah, I think moving forward, it should be a good thing.
Yeah. I saw that Shane has joined.
Oh, good.
Would you like them to be able to chime in?
If he has anything else to add.
Shane, how's your audio? Are you able to introduce yourself?
I can hear you. My camera's not working right now. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Well, in that case, I really don't have much to add to Eric's presentation there. I think one of our main obstacles has just been, the frustration and the shifting back and forth from one as we've been responding to different state messages. I think that we thought we had crossed the proverbial finish line when we made it into the $150 million group, until we were then subsequently booted after jumping through all of the hoops. And I'm not sure if it was just Eric, was it just the three? We were one of those three counties that took the necessary steps to show that we really had data systems and challenges that were at the level or worse than the 7 counties that were kind of unilaterally put into that group. So I can't say I entirely understand the holistic vision statewide as to how we're tackling the more comprehensive parts of the unhoused population. I know originally the intent was to move the original 150 million, in the words of the original declaration, was to moved unhoused, unsheltered people to a status of unhoused and sheltered, though. But it seems like this is a more comprehensive problem that needs a more comprehensive approach. And I just like that we're finally starting to talk about it.
Thanks for that, Shane. Questions about what's going on in Linn County?
It's made it easy.
I have a question. Are you guys connected to the group that meets at the fire station? Okay, so that's the same effort, because there's a group that meets at the fire station once a month.
City of Albany, homeless problems, yeah.
Okay.
I share the sentiment about how difficult it has been with the changing requirements and landscape of the state. Yeah, that has been a challenge and a barrier.
So one of the things I'm working on now is, back in January, when the governor made her declaration, she also stated that, state of Oregon properties are gonna be available for homeless use. And I'm still waiting to get a list of those state properties. I was just promised today that by Friday I'll have the list. I'll believe it when I see it. But, cause that's the biggest thing too, is that, you know, we all realize that, we need more space, we need more shelters, we need more, you know, locations for individuals to go. But at the same time, we're really limited by, you know, locations within the city that are, you know, nobody wants it in a residential area. It needs to be in a commercial or industrial zone, but it has to be close to, you know, services that provide for them. And so, you know, really, when you look at all the constraints that are needed, we're very, very limited as to where we can put something. And so hopefully with the state properties, the list coming out, we'll be able to figure something out. Because there truly is a need. We'll find out.
Do we have any state properties here in Corvallis that don't know about?
Not a lot. So, I mean, you might have like an easement or something like that that is for storing of equipment, but it would not necessarily be conducive for shelter.
Okay.
But I mean, we certainly can look into that and wait for the list.
Yeah. Teresa, are you back? You said you had to step away for a second. Cause I'd love to hear from her perspective about what's going on in Linn and Lincoln, with Hughes rolling out and what that's looking like.
You don't want to talk anything about Benton County's House Bill 5019 or anything like that, if we're moved to Fuse, or do you want to move to Fuse? Just
Well, Teresa's not back, so yeah, let's, really kind of sharing the sentiments you had. We did not go for, inclusion in the original executive order, not knowing if funds were tied to it, and also being a House Bill 4123 community, we had some funding for staffing. But that meant that we were part of the rollout in July, where an email, I think it went out like June 23rd and was due July 21st. Like 19 business days, to do similar to what the MAC group had done. And the Hope Board, you know, a lot of you have participated in 5019. And some of the recent news, that we got, really just like a couple days ago, was that there was such an overwhelming request for emergency sheltering funds. I think it was like 30 applications and roughly $30 million, way more than 6 million, right? For 26 counties. That OHCS is pivoting a bit, and they're gonna be reducing the rapid rehousing allocation for everybody to put more of that funding towards shelter. We don't quite know what that means yet. We did have one application in Benton County, and I know one application in Linn County moving forward for that competitive shelter amount. But OHCS has required those applications to reduce the budget by 30%. And we still don't know sort of how that equates to a budget reduction for rapid rehousing. But we did hear from other counties in the Rock who did not have a competitive application for shelter. They're also hearing that the rapid rehousing amount is going down. So it's gonna affect everybody across the board. We don't know amounts yet. So it's been bittersweet because we know we need shelter operation money. And that's what everybody has said. Shelters are closing their doors because there isn't enough money to operate them. And at the same time, it would be great if additional amounts were allocated to that instead of our rapid rehousing fund going down. So more to come on that. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just the, through our local planning group process, like you were kind of saying, is the gaps, the filling the gaps and understanding the complexity of the existing system and the connection points to understand. We know we're dealing with an amount of money that is not going to necessarily move the dial significantly through just considering the application of money. However, the planning process that we engaged in here, we did identify some really specific things that seem to be where current available funding just doesn't fit. And one of those, you know, really was like landlord engagement and incentives, really, because one of the thing that I think, Shane, you alluded to this, was that originally, you know, the idea is, we're targeting a population that is unsheltered homelessness to get them to be sheltered homeless. Well, the rapid rehousing, requirement is going from unsheltered homelessness to rehoused within that 2-year period in Corvallis. I'm sure we share the same thing in Linn and Lincoln, is the limitation of units to get people into that classification of being housed. And so where can we leverage the existing voucher systems or the existing rental assistance programs to be able to make those connections? And so, you know, we've sort of identified that that was one real key item here, is how are we engaging our landlords to look creatively at, you know, whether it's block leasing or mass leasing kinds of things. And then also, very much so on the culturally specific, as we identified our subpopulations, the overrepresentation, is how are we making sure that those resources are targeted to the organizations who really, you know, one of the key messages we got from our local planning group process was, you know, the trust of the messenger. Like, that's something that, how can we build that entryway for people to make things truly accessible? And so we're looking into that. And then the third one was the fact that, again, you alluded to this, the falling through the gaps, is that while we have lots of good programs, a very complex and robust system, there are still people who still need emergency resources or vital resources to sustain just standard livability, but don't qualify because they're not right at that, like, basically emergency level as many of the programs are required. So,
Or they don't qualify for
Exactly.
other reasons. There's like great rental assistance or rapid rehousing or voucher, whatever other program. There's a multitude of issues that make quite a few different people not qualify for, whether it's a voucher or the rapid rehousing, or not able to be in shelter, because it doesn't work for them and it doesn't work for the safety of the shelter. Yeah, they still have need.
so there's a balance, like, between prevention and the, you know, knowing that they want the money to go right towards people who are counted, and what our number is, and I don't know if that's gonna change with the change that we just heard about on Friday.
Yeah.
But 33 people, well, okay, you know, it has to strictly be used for getting people to rehouse, but there are action items that this money, because of the flexibility and our existing systems, we don't want to compete with those existing systems and now have a rental assistance program that's competing with an existing rental assistance program for unavailable units, right? And
We
so
have a
how,
voucher program.
Right,
and they can't
exactly.
place the vouchers that are in people's hands. Yeah.
but we've had, recently we had a conversation, you know, with Linn Benton Housing Authority, Dev Northwest, even the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, about the voucher programs, and just how maybe this can be sort of that and mortar between the bricks, so to speak. And also, as we've talked to this group for a while about House Bill 4023, which is, you know, our coordinated homeless response offices, what is the role that plays? And so, while yes, the timing and the deadlines around House Bill 5019 have been very ambitious, it has really quickly identified a role that this kind of leadership and organization could provide a community moving forward beyond House Bill 5019, as far as making these connections between those really strong and effective programs. Just because our landscape is changing so much, we need that kind of somebody to make the connections. And
well, the other thing too is what's challenging is that there's been a lot of dollars that have been put towards homelessness the last several years because of COVID. And those dollars are drying up. And so you're literally trading dollars for dollars. And I don't see how we're going to be able to meet any of the governor's request or what she wants to get done, when all we're doing is just staying status quo with our money. And so, but like you say, though, it's like what was funded the last 3 or 4 years is not going to be funded moving forward. So it's too bad that there's not a plan at the state level, you know, a 10-year, 20-year plan to work off of.
Yeah, I feel that to my core, the sense of like, the analogy I keep thinking of is like, you know, COVID made it rain as far as like money went. But like in Oregon, we get a regular amount of rainfall, November through May, that we can rely on, it's this many inches, like we're gonna be able to refill our stores. We need that kind of reliable, sustainable, make it rain on the dollar front, so that it isn't COVID funds and this grant and this next grant and scramble in July and maybe you get the funding and maybe you don't. But just, and that's what I think, and I hope the state is trying to figure out with 5019, how much does it cost for what kind of shelter and how many beds? Because that needs to be funded reliably and sustainably. But I also really feel you on, our local shelter had to reduce capacity by almost half because the COVID funding ended in June. And now this 5019 of let's add shelter beds, they're just gonna be doubling their capacity back to what we had in COVID. But not adding beyond that, which is really where we need to go. So that's hard.
I definitely want to give space for other people, but I will mention that when we were talking specifically with the League of Cities and Association of Counties, when they were talking about the executive order and the concerns from the rural communities who were not included in that, and the talk about the methodology of how to get included in those executive orders, and really, with our leadership here advocating to use the structure of the House Bill 4123, the coordinating office for those communities. And when you talk about that strategic planning process, that's one of the requirements of our House Bill 4123 is to develop that strategic plan. I do believe there is a 10-year plan at the state level. I don't know how much that's being incorporated into this, rollout of this, one-time real trying to move the dial kind of activity. But one of the things that we will be doing in November is submitting a report to the state to talk about what kinds of challenges we ran into and or even advantages that we had. And one of the conversations that we even heard as we're brainstorming around House Bill 4123 is moving forward, if this was a model for other communities to potentially participate in the future. So but also the key, theme of House Bill 4123 is that local control and local flexibility, knowing that the resources can be so unique, even like with Linn and Benton and Lincoln. So
and yet they shouldn't.
Yeah, but I think that this conversation regionally, just that conversation that we can elevate a topic like that in the reports we give to the state too. Like, what does it mean beyond House Bill 5019 for some communities? We're projecting out 5 years here, what our plan is, but how can we support through CSC and the other things on regional and IHNCCO?
Well, the good thing too is that it doesn't cost any money to coordinate.
Right.
Well,
I mean, besides the time.
you can do it.
But yeah, I mean, we're not talking, millions of dollars or whatever. But the other thing too is that, by not using the original $150 million that was allocated, we actually have a little over 2 years to get the job done versus I think we originally had until the end of this year. And so it really doubled our time, over double our time. So.
Wow. Well, sort of the last item on our list of more like brainstorming and discussion is, how do we improve how we coordinate as a tri-county area and how we leverage this collective experience? You had struggles that we had the same struggles in Benton County, and so did Lincoln. And what does that look like to communicate and coordinate and have that regional collective impact? And Teresa, I want to make sure to make space for you because you have been involved in the CHIP process and also in the rollout of Fuse. I'd like to hear your ideas on this too. If you're at a place where you can participate.
Yes, I can. Yeah, thanks. As far as the funding and all of that work, as far as all of the housing landscape, I suppose, goes and where IHNCCO fits, because that's my perspective, of course, as the coordinated care organization. I think there's absolutely opportunity for IHNCCO to provide funds where there are gaps, where there are missing pieces that aren't being connected by a city, county, or other grants and House bills, et cetera. And so I'm really interested, well, we are really interested, not me, IHN, is really interested in the high risk, high need folks for the unhoused through the Fuse model and are standing that up. Well, funding, we're a convener, we're a backbone organization. We really take a collective impact perspective on these things. We believe that there are so many other people that are experts in serving unhoused folks, getting unhoused folks into permanent supportive housing or just permanent housing, whatever the case may be, or shelters as that may be. So we are interested in helping support resources and funding for things like the Fuse model, so frequent user system engagement. The Albany Fire Department is actually, we just got the contract executed, so I can call it out, but they will be convening and collaborating with folks in Linn County. They already have what's called a community paramedic program, which is similar to something like the Fuse model, where they have a oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, an EMT, but a health, sort of like a social worker slash EMT that goes into people's homes when they call for an ambulance or they call for support or unhoused folks, and support them with their social needs instead of doing an emergency department visit necessarily. They come and they try to assess what are the actual needs, what does your space look like? Because I mean, there is unhoused, there's also underhoused or folks that are not safely housed, etc. And so they've already have a little piece of this work of working with pretty high risk, high need folks. So hopefully establishing the Fuse model here in Albany can help support getting our unhoused folks connected to all the resources they need and be a wraparound point for them. They really are getting these funds to be a convener and a collaborator with all of the work that is already going on here in Linn County. That is just starting. That is brand new information. You're probably the first to hear it outside of just a couple folks that obviously had to be a part of the contract, or maybe the Linn County commissioners. And Lincoln County, they're also looking to establish this. Again, this is where IHN CCO has supported with some funding. We're supportive of the model because that's what we've heard from our community. And we want to be one of the conveners, a collaborator, and continue to be that, but we really want to be this backbone. Like, we know you can do the work. What do you need from us? So in Lincoln County, Reconnections Counseling, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, Coastal Phoenix Rising, and Samaritan House. I think there are probably other partners too. I hope I'm not missing them, but they're all coming together to collaborate as well to take these high risk, high need folks, sit down and actually look at each individual person's needs and figure out a space for them. Where do they belong in this continuum of care? Where do they belong as far as behavioral health supports? All these other things. It's just, it has to be this cross-system collaboration in order for that to work. So that's a model that we've been working on. We're also working with the regional health assessment, like Julie talked about, in making sure that as a region, we are establishing our priorities and strategies based on what community partners, people with lived experience, and this board actually hits both of those, both of those things, have to say about the state of housing, about where are the gaps, what are the strategies that we need to do to actually hopefully eradicate homelessness, right? That would be nice to at least get close to that 0 point. And so the regional health assessment and it's called the Partnership for Community Health, that is the group that's collaborating on these health assessments and health improvement plan. It's our county health departments, it's the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, it's Samaritan Health Services, it's IHN CCO, these United Way as well, the Benton Lincoln Health Equity Alliance. These folks are really saying, okay, we've established 4 priorities. Julie mentioned housing being one of them. The lack of access to affordable housing is the specific call out. What has the Hope Board already done to assess the community needs, and what strategies are you already recommending, and can we take those strategies and use this as a foundation for this priority area. So what the regional health assessment, the community health assessment, the community health improvement plan, the partnership, you can use people use all of those interchangeably to describe this relationship, this collaborative relationship. So that's why I use all of them. It can prioritize funding from like the CCO, for instance, or potentially public health department directives and initiatives as well. So we have a few things going on where we're trying to fit in to the gaps from the CCO perspective, but by listening though to people like the Hope Board, the Heart Board in Linn County, the Linn County Homeless Advisory Board, I listen to those meetings and gather the information from there so we can have a regional perspective on the needs, but still taking note that each county is different, and then among each county there's cities that are different, there's neighborhoods that are different, place matters, right? So that's sort of my little spiel on that. Is that the thoughts you wanted, Julie, or what are your questions?
Yeah, if I may, real quick, Teresa, I'm backing up quite a bit. When you were talking about the community paramedic program, who's funding that? What's that model all about? I mean, and how do you see that kind of aligning with Corvallis and the core team we have here? Just wondering what the distinctions are there.
So the community paramedic project was originally a sort of an innovative transformation. If anybody has been to the delivery system transformation committee with IHN, that would ring a bell. Maybe a couple of you have. That was a newly funded project back in 2017 or 18. I only brought it up today because just to clarify, not to clarify, to set context, if anyone knew about it, that the Albany Fire Department has experience with these high risk, high need folks and looking at their social needs and how to support them. Not all fire departments have those type of programs that are really member and individual specific, where they're doing outreach out to them. So that's why the Albany Fire Department was, some people might find it an interesting choice as a partner to convene something like the Fuse model, but that is just to share their experience. We haven't funded it at IHN, CCO, or Samaritan in quite a few years now. I believe that's just operationalized through their budget, and I believe it's like a one FTE and maybe some coordination, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
It seems really similar to our core crisis outreach response engagement. It's a police officer and a behavioral health pair going out from 911 calls.
One of the things I'll add on Albany's paramedic program is that the person doing it, Hillary Kosmicki, she started a homeless meeting there at the fire station back in December, I think, last year. And a prime example of what's been accomplished is that when we started meeting in December, both of the shelters, Helping Hands and Second Chance there in Albany, they're about, for those of you who don't know, they're a couple blocks apart. They were averaging about 50 fire EMS calls together a month. And so they were really utilizing the 911 system for things that aren't warranted, aren't needed. And so those calls have gone back to about 10 and between the two. So they're really saving the 911 system for more emergencies. And the good thing is that these individuals are getting plugged into the services that they need, whether that is, going to urgent care. And we also found, it was interesting, is that it brought to light a situation where the reason why everybody was calling 911 is so that they go to the emergency room to get seen, right? Even though it was like just a normal cough or whatever. So then you ask the individual, well, why don't you go to urgent care? Well, I don't want to go to urgent care because they won't see me because I don't have a valid ID. So then you start tracking down that rabbit hole, and it's like, well, then we get the person an ID, and then they start going to urgent care, and we arrange taxi services for them. And so it's one of those things where, a lot of things get accomplished when you have everybody that's involved in the system around the table. It's amazing. You've been to those meetings, haven't you? Yeah. So it's like, you've got 30 people around the table, and, you start talking through the system as to what happens, and all of a sudden it's like we run into a hole. And then somebody said, well, I can figure that out. Let's work it this way. Let's do this and do that. And it's amazing the collaboration that goes on.
Yeah. I see Brian and I think Joel was still here. And I'm wondering if you have any perspective on this in Corvallis, with the fire department involvement, and CPD. And I know that's why we're rolling out the situation table. But I didn't know if there's any other perspective you wanted to share.
So I joined a little late, so I missed the main point of the conversation here, but from what I gather, it's about problem solving and collaboratively working with other partners to find solutions tailored to individuals. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, Julie. I think for our community, that's where the situation table is going to fit.
Yeah, I was just pleasantly surprised to hear that IHN had started the funding and that it's become a part of the regular fire department team to have an LCSW, a social worker, mental health person, who goes out on fire department calls for those reasons. And Brian Cotter, are you at a point where you can share if there's anything that happens like that with your department?
So currently with our department, we don't have a community paramedic at the moment. We're just a agency that responds to the calls that we need. And we do talk about those calls that we run that aren't necessarily an EMS call that's needed. And a lot of times I know that we've been reaching out to CPD and getting their Benton County crisis team that's working with CPD coming out to calls and taking over calls that aren't really an EMS stance, and it's more of a Benton County crisis call than an EMS call itself. So therefore, there's not really a need to transport to the hospital in relation to that call, right? But so as for a community paramedic, we don't have anything in the works on that right now. It would be a great program to have, but once again, it comes down to the funding for it, right?
All right. Thank you. Just an update for folks that Peggy said to share. They're on a level 3 evacuation, be ready to go. So they're packing pets and bags, and she cannot join the meeting. So I hope she's okay. Joel, there's fires happening in Peggy's area. So she had to jet to go pack up and possibly evacuate. So, wow. Well, the update from her was going to be about Lincoln County, but also more regional, in line with what Teresa was saying. Leveraging that 3 counties have similar needs and are experiencing very similar hurdles and barriers. And any creative thoughts or existing channels of communication or coordinating. I mean, at the Hope Executive Committee, Peggy said, let's use a Hope Board meeting to talk about what's going on. And Teresa, I know that you're convening the Coalition for Housing Equity, and I'm not sure everybody knows about it, but do you want to describe that?
Yeah, absolutely. So IHNCCO started the Coalition for Housing Equity, not that long ago, maybe 6 months ago. And we meet every other month, and we've tried to include as many housing organizations as possible in the 3-county area, Benton, Lincoln, Linn area. And the main, like, sort of top goal that's, I guess, short-term-ish would be to create a housing benefit for IHNCCO members, so Oregon Health Plan members. That's a big focus because that's what's starting on July 1st of 2024 per our contract, the Oregon Health Authority contract, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So it's coming down from the top that we're going to start being able to pay for housing in some way. But we don't have direction still, but we're getting closer from our regulatory agencies on what that really looks like. We do know that the focus is on prioritized populations, unhoused folks, youth in transition from foster care, so that 18 to I think 24 age range. And some other priority populations should be eligible for this housing benefit. The housing benefit, of course, there's a lot of ideas on it right now. There's a limitation on rental assistance, though, for instance, to like 6 months. So the CCO would be able to provide 6 months worth of rent for an unhoused member of the Oregon Health Plan in our region. And so the Coalition for Housing Equity, we convened it because we wanted to understand is that rental assistance is just a really easy, straightforward, great example. Is that enough? Is that actually meeting the needs of our community? What can we do? Who can we partner with to help maybe braid these funds? So if we do 6 months of rental assistance and the Community Services Consortium, our regional community action agency, as you know, can provide certain amount of months of housing. How can we do this so we're actually supporting the whole member being able to get into the kind of housing that they need? That's one of the examples of the hope for the coalition for housing equity. There's a strong focus on understanding systemic racism and the roots of oppression in the systems as they currently stand, and looking for racial justice there. So supporting our most vulnerable members, communities of color, our disabled folks, LGBTQI2I. Oh, I don't mess that up very often. LGBTQIA2S plus, for instance. And so our marginalized communities as well, hence the housing equity. It's open to anybody that it can impact housing in our region and that wants to be a part of it. So please reach out to Transformation. Julie will give that out, I'm sure, and I can put it in the chat as well. But other goals like long-term include continuing this regional relationship. So Community Services Consortium, IHN, CCO, Chance, there's many more. Some of you here I'm sure are involved with some regional folks around Benton, Lincoln, and Linn counties. We want to make sure that we can understand, communicate, and talk. Julie just said, there are so many similar needs. They might be a little bit different, but there's so many similar. How can we come together with our strategies and building our relationships to get, sorry, I have something in my eye suddenly, and I ignored it for a second, but it was unignorable at that moment.
You're good.
But the point is for us to really understand as a region, what can we do? But again, still honing in down to the county, the city, the neighborhood even, and filling those gaps where things are needed, but talking and communicating at the regional level. Also for advocacy reasons, one of the goals of the coalition is also to advocate for resources up to not just our regulatory agencies from the CCO perspective, certainly the Oregon Health Authority and others, but what other leadership or groups at the statewide or even national level can we advocate for the right resources? So that's not intended to take the place of anything like the Hope Board or any sort of housing authority or anything. It's just trying to bring in a little bit of a different perspective for us and also the regional perspective. And then, like I said, maybe we can get some movement as a region and apply for change to like the legislature and stuff in the long term.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm thinking of forums like the Willamette Criminal Justice Council, WCJC. They do a lot of convening to talk about what's going on with the region. Eric, do you coordinate at all with folks in Benton or Lincoln, or is this really kind of the first step in that direction?
First step, yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad you took it. One thing that Teresa spurred in my mind that I'd love to get your take on, Eric, and Jonna Peters, if you're still tuned in, you'd want to listen to this part. Part of what we looked at in the month of July with 5019 was what are our top populations that are overrepresented in our unhoused population and are experiencing the greatest barriers to get back into housing. And so we convened 2 local planning group meetings in that time with folks who are doing direct services, culturally specific services, and also looked at our data. So a lot of it was grounded in data, but our 3 subpopulations, and I'd love to hear yours too. In particular, it's not just our data, but our service providers too are saying that there are two groups that are overrepresented by race and ethnicity, and it's our Black community and our Native American community. And that's not just in the data. There's some intersectionality there, especially for our Black community, with felony convictions, and criminal histories that are keeping them from being able to get into housing in a way that other folks experiencing homelessness who are not Black and who don't have felony convictions are not facing that same barrier. And then with our Native American community, within the geographic limits of Benton County, we don't have a federally recognized tribe, and that's a travesty in and of itself, and a bigger issue. But when it comes to being able to access resources for housing, and rental assistance, that's why we reached out to the Celeste tribe, and Rebecca did a really great job of making sure to include their housing manager, because there are resources available, but there isn't a place where you can walk in a door in Benton County and say, what do I have access to? What can I get help with? I'm tribal affiliated, but I'm not part of a federally recognized tribe. What does that mean for this person? And that is a specific barrier that is cultural for that community that other folks aren't facing. So that was one sort of subpopulation where folks are experiencing barriers based on race and ethnicity in ways that other folks aren't. The other group was families, large families with lots of kids. And it was heartbreaking to hear about, and all of our service providers on this call who are doing everything they can to coordinate and help, but trying to help a family with children. There are specific barriers there because you'd never want to lose your kid. So getting help, if it meant losing your kid, you don't want that, of course. And then how do you find a unit that you can afford when you have 4 children? So there's some real specific barriers there, and they're becoming more and more overrepresented. And then the last subpopulation, it's what we talked about earlier, folks who need help, who don't qualify for a specific program. Like this person obviously needs help, or they need mental health help, but they're not in our severely permanently mentally ill cutoff for that kind of housing help. But they do need mental health, but it's 6 months out for a wait list. And so how do we help folks who don't qualify for our existing programs? And then a fourth topic that came up, and Andrew, I don't know if you were in this meeting, people who are currently very insecurely housed, but they don't have an eviction notice in hand yet. And so they can't get help with rapid rehousing or rental assistance. And so they are borrowing from anyone in their network to stay housed and not get the eviction notice. And then they can't get help paying back everyone in their network, and they burn bridges, and then end up becoming unhoused, and then they can get help. But then that golden unit that they could afford is gone and back on the market. So those were our top 3 and almost a fourth there. Yeah, I'd love to hear about yours. What came out of your process, if you remember off the top of your head?
Well, I'm gonna think it back as yes, everything you said, we've talked about. But one thing that I would add too is, when there's new ordinances or whatever that's getting passed by city, county government, try to look at it from a homelessness point of view as to how it's going to impact them. Because, a lot of the decisions that are made, I don't want to say a lot, but some of the decisions that are made at the government level has an impact on, and I think back to a conversation I had with a homeless individual several years ago in downtown Salem, where, a lot of people were camping in the parks, and the city of Salem didn't like them congregating in the restrooms. So what do? The first thing they did was at 9 o'clock at night, they shut all the restrooms down, they locked them all down, thinking that they're going to be doing the community a service. But the problem is that, they have to go to the bathroom someplace. And so this one individual, he decided to go to the bushes, and he was in there, and then the police caught him, and then they cited him for urinating in public. And which is sad, because this individual, he lost his job, he lost his family, he lost his house, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And he said, it's very hard to get back up on my feet when now I have a criminal record. I got a ticket, and it's to my name, because I've never been in trouble with the law, but now all of a sudden I have that. And so you think back as to what are we doing that's preventing these individuals or making it more difficult for them to get up on their 2 feet. So from that approach, you keep that in mind. But the one thing that got brought up at our last MAC group meeting, and it's one that I never really realized, is individuals with pets. Whether they are registered therapy dogs or service dogs, or if they're just, somebody's companion. They're very limited as to where they can go. They're very limited if a shelter will take them or not. You get the individual, you want to go to a job interview, well, they can't take their pet with them, so who's going to watch their pet? And so there's so many things centered around individuals with pets, and I never realized that there is a huge gap of how do we assist these individuals. And so, we're looking at short-term boarding opportunities and trying to see what's out there. So then it's like, well, if we found a place for them to go board their dog or for a few hours, is their dog up on vaccinations, and what do we need to do to get the vaccine for the animals and things. So that's one big thing, but and obviously, like everybody else, mental health and drug addictions and things like that, so.
Yeah. Anything to add? I know there's some folks on the call who participated in some of those local planning groups.
I was just curious, like the Hope board, prioritizes having people on the board that have that perspective and like lived experience. I'm just curious, in some of those other, like the Albany Fire Group, is that a priority, or have you sought out, people that could lend that perspective during the process of coordinating or brainstorming?
It's a good question.
Good question.
Because I think that is, almost like instrumental into, finding those little snags or that prevent a lot of work or more work when you can get that perspective early. Or
Well, there's a lot of assumptions too.
yeah,
And I hate it when people assume things.
yeah.
And it's much easier to go to the source and get it from them individually than it is to assume.
Jonna, can I put you on the spot and ask you if there's any strategy that the H.O.P.E regional partners are using to engage folks experiencing homelessness? I know the Hope Board, we've got 5 folks who've experienced being unhoused before, but are there other strategies that are being used regionally?
Yeah, no worries. And Teresa, as usual, I'm gonna also rely on you just since we're involved in this work together, but we're still pretty beginning in just the designing of what these work groups are looking like, but it's been brought up multiple times of how important it will be to loop those individuals with lived experience in. So I know we're kind of like gathering lists of community partners and such, but we're still brainstorming as a partnership on the actual final of what those look like. Trissa, please feel free to add anything, but we're not quite at that part yet where we know exactly how we're going to do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jonna. You're wonderful. Nothing to add.
With the H.O.P.E engagement and outreach, Andrea and Dan were really helpful and supportive. I hosted 3 focus groups, and one was at Corvallis Housing First at Van Buren House, and Dan facilitated the conversation, really saying, here are the priority areas that sort of the data and the research and the H.O.P.E board have identified. What do you think is any of this mean anything? Is it meaningful? What's the most important? What do you think? And then same at COI. 2 of their program managers supported me hosting a focus group at COI, which is it's its own year-long transformational housing program. And we got into a really deep conversation, and folks were at a point where they were able to kind of look back a little bit and say, here's how it felt, and now I can kind of talk about it. And then Allison Hobgood and Alita helped facilitate a conversation upstairs at the Daytime Drop-In Center, asking the same questions with a real different perspective of like, I'm in it right now and I can talk to you for 5 minutes, and then I need to go downstairs and get something to eat and get back over to this other location, make sure other things are okay. And it was a real variety of perspectives at Van Buren and COI and the Drop-In Center. And then Unity Shelter hosted a focus group at Safe Camp. And they wanted to do it themselves. And I fully respect that. I didn't want to, ruin sort of the trust, of the conversation as an outsider. And they typed up feedback of like, hey, here's what our residents, I think there were 9 or 10 at the time. Here's what our residents think. And some of it was what you're talking about, like, what do you mean? What's a 24/7 resource center? What does that mean? Like, can I sleep there? Can I go there? Will it be a place for my bike? What about my dog? Can I shower there? Can I pick up my mail? Can you help me with my social security card? Real sort of nitty gritty details. So that would be my advice, is to really engage providers like that to host focus groups, and then if you can pay them for their time. If there's a budget for stipends for folks to engage, Peggy McGuire gave a budget for batteries and socks and gloves and flashlights, to be able to give out to folks, and pizza, I think actually we ordered at Van Buren House. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great, like, model for other counties or whoever to consider. It's just that, like, getting in there straight to the source. There's so much wisdom there, and not only that, I think, it would prevent, getting too far ahead and then realizing, oh, we didn't think about pets or this, like, there's so much, wisdom in those communities, so.
Yeah, and that didn't like come out of my housed brain. That came from Alita being on the board and Andrea being on the board, and other folks on the board saying, hey, here's who I work with and here's where you need to go. Yeah.
We did that back in June when we were getting rolling on with things, and we reached out to a couple of the Hispanic organizations and the NAACP and the LGBTQ group in Albany, just to get their perspective on things, and they held focus groups and trying to get input. And
What is that group in Albany? I don't know it.
Pride, is it Pride event?
Okay.
Or Pride?
I know there's like a
Pride group.
there's like a planning group for Albany Pride. I don't know if it was.
I didn't know if it was the Willamette Trans Network or if there's a different, like, Albany specific LGBT broader group.
I don't think it was in Willamette.
Okay.
But I'm part of the Willamette, and we actually we're getting paid to help with the chip.
Great.
So I was, super excited that, we reached out from the health department to be involved in kind of consulting and adding, his feedback to that, so exciting, not super related to housing, but still.
But it is related to perspective and engagement.
And
paid for engagement.
So.
Well, and so one of the things that came out of the 5019 process, and the feedback that OHCS kept giving was, if you have an overrepresented group, and they're overrepresented because of race or ethnicity, invest in your culturally specific organization to build capacity, so that you aren't prioritizing race in a housing decision. And that has been a struggle here, but Faith, Hope, and Charity has really stepped forward to say, wrap around us, expand our organization. And so that's another thing when I'm thinking of sort of how do we leverage regional efforts. Faith, Hope, and Charity has a competitive application for 5019 sheltering in Linn County. They want to expand in Benton County. So how do we work together to build them as a regional organization that's culturally specific? I don't have a good answer to that yet, but it's a question. I want to make sure folks see what Alice put in the chat. Alice, can you share it verbally for people who can't access the chat? Go ahead and unmute yourself though. There we go. I can hear you now.
Unmute, okay. Are you asking me about the chat message that I put in?
Share it verbally, Alice, for people who can't access the chat.
Oh, it says, I recommend reading Poverty by America. This book raises questions about how houselessness is a planned agenda funded by the tax welfare the 1% are receiving. I think it would be interesting to look into how class action suits can be brought against HUD or maybe even the 1%. I'm thinking about the class action suit in Montana by the kids who just won. And reading Poverty in America makes it very clear that houselessness is part of the plan that is keeping the 1% in obscene wealth. And the tax The tax cuts the Republicans have given and the Democrats, because they're not immune, have made it possible for homelessness to become a huge problem that we never had before. We did not have this level of houselessness. So anyway, I think it would be interesting to read it, maybe have a focus group about it, and maybe raise questions about whether the houseless have legal recourse.
Bold.
Julie, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but I'm really interested in hearing about, because it concerns the 3-county area, if there's any update about the continuum of care efforts and stepping away from the rock. And I know Peggy's not here to provide that update, but that's really big news, and anything anybody knows, that would be good to, and how does that, maybe that's within there's been questions about how that goes with what the legislature is mandating for us to do for local planning too. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
No, I can share what little I know, which is that Peggy got the go-ahead from her board to pursue withdrawing from the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care, becoming our own Tri-County Continuum of Care, and that there is a lot left to figure out as far as what kind of staffing capacity that'll take at CSC. The process to do it, but she got the go-ahead to get in touch with the HUD representatives in Portland to just kind of give notice and say, what does this entail? What's the path? What's the timeline? And beyond that, I don't have more information. Does anybody on the call have more information about continuum of care stuff with CSC? We got a lot of well-versed people
We
here.
had a meeting a month ago, thought that.
Tell us. Okay.
Well, I'm still trying to remember everything, but, Peggy did host a meeting a month ago. And basically it was
Was it with Brooke Matthews, from the Rural Continuum Care?
Yeah, and,
CSC?
They wanted the individuals from Marion County that came down and talked about what they did and their history and how they're moving forward. So, and I do remember, at the very end of the meeting, there was a good representation of 35 individuals there. And we all was like, hey, everybody in agreement, and we all raised our hand, and took our vote. So, it sounds like it's moving ahead and, slowly but surely, it will be going, it sounds like.
It's just huge because that really will, it doesn't come with a ton of funding at first, but what it does is it forces the 3 counties to work together, because if you're gonna form a continuum of care, that doesn't just mean saying, oh, we're gonna be a continuum of care. You have to have policies, procedures, you have to have committees that are working towards different goals. There's data requirements as a part of being a COC, and that's probably gonna come into conflict with some of the stuff that's going on with using a variety of different databases. I know that, we use shelter care or shelterware, for example, and there's also the system that's being used by IHN and other CCOs across the state. So it's just like, it's big to be able to do that. So that's something to just pay attention to. And I think that will help us regionally plan for, how to strategize around shelter and housing and homelessness response.
Well, the other thing too is that since it doesn't come with a whole lot of funding, it does open the door for grant opportunities that we can get that would come directly to us instead of the bigger groups. So.
And considering the governor's office is really prioritizing funding focusing on COCs as regions, that will help us as well. So we won't maybe have this conundrum we were included in the rock and then the counties had to step away from the rock. So, and rural Oregon or rural continuum cares across the country are starting to break up, because there's just no way that you can combine that many counties in one area and expect everybody's going to agree on how to approach issues. So
one thing I would say, for the data system part, when we were doing a lot of research on coordinated entry, Melissa Baker from Clark County, Washington, enlightened me that as their own continuum of care, they could pay WellSky to build out parts of service points to be shelter point and case management point, sort of the functions that shelterware was built for. and functions that unite us for, tracking bed placement, and case management notes in the HMIS that reports it to HUD, so there isn't double reporting. And that kind of flexibility comes with becoming our own continuum. And then the assessment tool, having control over our own assessment tool, that comes with that kind of autonomy.
Right.
Any,
For those who might need a refresher with the assessment tool, I think just real short.
or the assessment tool we use is the VI SPDAT, the Vulnerability Index, and I can't remember what SPDAT stands for, but it's like 50 questions that can take anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours to answer, depending on how much trauma a person has experienced. It's really tough, invasive, traumatic questions, meant to determine someone's vulnerability as unhoused, while they are unhoused.
To prioritize the housing opportunities, that's something that I think we've given updates before about the coordinated entry process here. And so the continued care, having that local control will give the communities more ability to create a coordinated entry system that really works for their community versus compelling a rural continued care of 26 counties. So that's the connection there. I just want to make sure there might be some people who are in the weeds like us. So
Totally. No, I'm waist high in the weeds. Folks on the call who are joining virtually, anything to add or questions about this? Ideas, thoughts, comments? Let me check the chat here. Well, if there are not more updates.
Well, I did want to express my appreciation for you elevating that talk about the continued care. What we had hoped is maybe kind of building up, talking about House Bill 5019, House Bill 4123, and with Peggy kind of broaching those topics about this is starting to get us talking. I mean, Eric's here with us, the experience we're gaining as Tri-County around this and kinds of the heavy lifts that we've been making. I'm hopeful that is preparing us for those larger conversations around the continued care.
I would hope that it's helping to give us capacity too, to become our own COC. Because it is a lot of work, so.
Well, and I think, the opportunities for regional coordination, that we had just talked about were continuum of care work, and then the CHIP work, the regional community health improvement planning of affordable housing and access to it. And the result of not having access being homelessness is one of the top 3 to 4 priorities. That's how we leverage, as a Tri-County area. So keeping that discussion going. And Eric, thank you for driving all the way out here.
All right.
I'm gonna go ahead and pivot. And Eric, you are welcome to stay for this conversation, because some of it really does have to do with communication and outreach and planning. Okay, let's see here. Let me make sure I have this high presenter view. Resume. Oh, thank you. Yes. Anything else from folks at home now that I bring up this slide? Before we pivot. Okay, we're gonna transition. So as part of House Bill 4123, Eric, we've had to do a 5-year strategic plan. Do you want to kick it off? You wrote this, right?
Okay, well, so basically today we've come here in this forum a few times with different drafts of the strategic plan, really showing you how we're organizing it and the overarching strategic priorities and how those align with the whole policy recommendations that this group has worked on, along with the update to the 10-year plan that was in 2018, as far as the kind of the foundation laid by this community moving forward to make sure that we're still, maintaining those common themes, but also moving in the direction that we need to in prioritizing specific populations. So today we come to you specifically with to review the role that we've identified the H.O.P.E Advisory Board in the coordinated homeless response system as defined by the House Bill 4123. And then also the specific action items that we have identified in the strategic plan to review those with you, brainstorm about what those might mean to you, and then just talk to you about the next steps. And then next slide.
Yeah.
So, when we've come to you before, and as we were understanding House Bill 4123 as far as the requirements and understanding how this will work with the components we already had in our community, specifically with the staffing that we had in the county, along with the Hope Advisory Board, and then other components that we already had moving forward, like our partnership with the city. You know, we've identified, you know, what were the key role that this aligns with the Hope bylaws, but very specifically that we identified the role of the Hope Advisory Board in the system as one, a forum for community and stakeholder engagement, which I think we're all here today as we see that this is an opportunity to have a wide array of community expertise and representation of groups both working on homelessness and those who've even experienced homelessness or other social determinants that could lead to a vulnerability towards homelessness. Also a liaison role as through the Hope policy recommendations, that was a great example of that liaison role between the community and the governing board. So that being city council and the board of commissioners to help inform specific strategies to respond to homelessness in our community. But also to have that real close partnership with the community to make sure that liaison communication is happening effectively to our elected officials. And then input, an opportunity to give input to the different strategies that we're undertaking, and specifically in this case, the 5-year strategic plan.
Alice has to exit. Well, this really speaks to, you know, what you're talking about, Eric, and also Teresa and Jonna. What are existing forums that can be leveraged so that we can coordinate, and the Hope Board's role as a forum, the members on it liaising, and then getting input from a group of folks who have a wide variety of experiences. Okay. This is a great little graphic that you and Kaylee put together for the liaising role. Do you want to walk it through?
Yeah, so we didn't give a lot of slides to do a full-on summary of what got us here to this graphic today, but one of the requirements of the House Bill 4123 is that you create what they call an advisory board. Now, at the time, that very likely could be interpreted as meaning our Hope Advisory Board, but as we learned about the definitions in the House Bill 4123, it was very specifically having representation of member governments who come together and partner for a coordinated homeless response system. And then another component required by the House bill was a strong stakeholder engagement component. And so when we were identifying the different roles, we went with the Intergovernmental Council that has representation now from Philomath, the city of Corvallis, CSC, and Benton County commissioners.
And Monroe is participating.
Yeah. So we got participation as formal memorandum of the agreement that was required by House Bill 4123. Right now we have formal membership by those communities, but we still are closely engaging our unincorporated communities along with any other incorporated city that has not yet had an opportunity to sign on or is still learning more about this opportunity.
Adair and Elsie are invited and included.
Yes. So that role is really that operational oversight and leadership. I was just talking to somebody today, you know, that I was evaluating a heat pump at my house, and she asked me what I did for work, and I talked about it, and her clear statement to me was we need more leadership around this topic, really making those connections between what the staff are doing at the city and the county level, and having those connections with the elected officials to truly prioritize this work in our community. Our board of commissioners, as far as their budgetary strategic priorities, list housing and homelessness as a key priority. So how are we making sure those connections are being made at a county-wide level? And so the coordinating office staff, which Julie and I are part of, that's really that staff work, you know, the work that came into facilitating this meeting today, and the House Bill 5019 planning and various things with our partners providing such great support. And then here we are with our Hope Community Engagement Board, really that opportunity to have that community input forum and liaison component that goes through the Hope Executive Board back to the city councils and the Board of Commissioners. So that was just a visual to help us figure out where all that goes. So moving into the role as we've identified it in the strategic plan. Okay, I wasn't sure if there's a question about, okay, so you'd let me know, okay.
Anita's pager went off, she has to exit.
Okay, so the strategic plan, as we presented in some previous meetings, we're organizing it around the key prevention strategies identified in the update to the 10-year plan. And we can see that these very much so align with the whole policy recommendations and the requirements of House Bill 4123 as well. But these are and there was a lot of data and research and community engagement that happened to identify these as community priorities in Benton County. And so in reviewing this, as we were identifying specific action items in each of these categories, really it's the sixth category of being community engagement, inclusion, and neighborhood belonging that we felt HOPE really plays a key component in that role. So we'll go to the next slide. Oh, so this is just to give us, as we get to the discussion point here in a few minutes, just to show you kind of how we're organizing the strategic plan. This is just an example. This is not to have a discussion about the specific work identified, but we really want to have a 5-year projection. So we might have like an overarching project description on the left-hand side, and then we can identify key steps to meeting our community goals moving forward. So yeah, and then so that being said, we've identified a few ways of describing potential ones, goals that we have around this particular category and priority. And we've identified them as these following for the HOPE Advisory Board. Do you want to list these off?
Yeah, we presented these earlier, so talked about it in January, discussed and drafted in March, and then in May, this is what we came back to you with. And so just sort of refreshing your memory, or if this is the first time you're seeing it, you're a new board member, didn't make one of those. The role that the HOPE Board plays and the work that this forum will do over the next 5 years. Community progress updates to highlight partner achievements, improving public visibility of the HOPE Advisory Board as a community education forum, building community-wide awareness and understanding in and around homelessness. And there is, a policy recommendation role that this board has played with the policy recommendations. And we're working to implement them now. And if there's a need for policy input from the city or county elected officials, this board will play that role again. But for right now, at this point in time, these are sort of the 3 key things that happen at this board. And so wanting to ask you all, this is about the educational topics, but wanting to ask you all, does that make sense? What we're sharing here today, is it still in line with how you see the HOPE Board? Yeah, any feedback?
A better way of saying it.
Yeah, any feedback on this? You've seen it a couple times now. We're at a different point in time. We're finalizing it this month.
Just agree with the second point, especially. I feel like I hear so much like chatter in the community, like, why isn't more being done? Like people just don't know how much work literally is being done. Like, and so I feel like that would really, I mean, all of it's important, but that's just like, seems so relevant to just kind of what I've heard in the community, people talking with like so much misinterpretations or just not awareness. And it's like, I think people, would, if they knew more, would maybe we'd see more people at the meetings and just like give people peace of mind, even that like we're really putting people's minds together on this issue. But yeah,
absolutely. Communication, awareness. Well, and that feeds into what we'd like to get a little bit in the weeds with you all about. In the past, we have done educational components at every board meeting, and we've really focused on the strategic plan and House Bill 4123 and then House Bill 1519 this year. But really wanting your feedback and in the weeds kind of discussion, given all the progress and changes, what are some current educational needs of the board and in the community, and giving you an example to kind of kick off your discussion. Bye, Teresa. There's been a lot of interest in what does the Fair Housing Council do? What do fair housing laws protect? How can people get access to those resources or learn more? And so I've met with the Fair Housing Council folks, and they can come in January to give an educational overview on this topic. In the past, we've had educational speakers about EDI, behavioral health. our service providers, IHN's role, law enforcement experience. And so thinking as a community progress update forum, and building awareness and understanding in and around homelessness, what do you think is most topical to focus on this fall, next winter and spring and next summer? So I can start looking at prioritizing educational components. I'll give you some examples on this slide in case it jogs folks' memory.
I mean, off the bat, I'm just thinking, like, I advocate a lot for LGBT folks, and I'm always open to like giving trainings on that. I think it's a super relevant conversation for like housing, specifically with youth. Just because, I mean, in like the cultural, political moment we're in right now too, I think that's probably even more exacerbated, like youth, you know, finding themselves homeless due to family rejection. I mean, it's a really culturally relevant issue in the community right now.
I know we're doing a training with the health department.
Yeah, so I know there's like so many other important things, but that is something I would at least be willing to provide like an educational component about if there's interest. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to this in case that
Yeah,
jogs people's minds.
I wanted to kind of pull out the word visibility, the public visibility. I think that this particular topic could go into any of these three things, you know, that how do we get the community understanding that this is a resource for the entire community, right? Because I think we can talk about the education, like what you were saying, but to really get it to the individuals that could help them understand what they're seeing in the community.
Yeah, that's, yeah, a very potent point of like, just, yeah, getting that under, like, people see it in the
Right.
community and then they think they don't see this. And so
Right, and
they,
in their family. basically.
Yeah.
I think that's, and so
Yeah.
building that awareness and compassion about some of these.
So some kind of educational component of, some of the myriad causes around why folks experience homelessness, and then what is going on? Like, what is the work that's being done? Having that maybe on like an annual basis of like a recap, all the great work that's happened the past year on this, and this. And I think I did that last fall. I did like an annual recap in November of like, here's where we've come in the past year.
and even just like awareness of like these meetings being open to the public and like, I don't know, we have to brainstorm about like how exactly to disseminate that information and like, get the word out to the appropriate channels, but I definitely think there's, yeah, just potential to like spread the word more, that visibility piece, because it is like amazing work that's being done in this community in the Tri-County area that I don't think is modeled in like a lot of other states or communities, so I think, yeah, just kind of being in the community and talking to people, it seems like there's, at least in my circles, just so little awareness that like the Hope Board even exists. And I think there's a lot of people, like I'm thinking in my life that would, or my communities that would be like excited to hear or just like heartened or it would affect their lives too.
Okay.
So yeah, not only like an annual review, but just like ways to spread the word in general.
Communications.
Yeah.
Carol, I saw your hand up first and then Ari.
I just want to build on that. I think that and I've said this several times, so it's not news, but we tend to focus on the riverfront population and we tend to focus on garbage. And so people come by and they have a hostile sense about, you know, why don't these people clean up after themselves? Something simply answering that question, you know, you know, where are they going to put their stuff and why is there garbage around and what is that all about? And then we also, there's a whole issue of the kids that I think the number of families that are homeless that don't seem to get quite as much attention. I mean, when I hear people talk about homelessness, there's really two issues. You know, what's the city doing? You know, why is it so hard to have a warming shelter? Why is it so hard to have, you know, these things aren't that hard. Why is it so hard? So I don't know if that's an area that Hope can address, but certainly trying to educate people on why somebody becomes homeless. And we've done this 100 times, but it's that message it's, what do they say in PR? You tell them and you tell them and you tell them, you know, why they become homeless. What are the options for them? You know, talking about the SORT team, what's the SORT team doing? Talking about the effect on children when they don't have access to homes and how it affects them in terms of their scholarship, or scholarship's probably a little large word for a kindergartner. But so I think that whole educational piece is really key to our community, because most of the people don't care. You know, they're living in their homes, they have their homes, and they mostly see it as a bother. And somehow getting the business community a little more aware of what their role might be. So there's a lot of stuff. I don't need to keep going on. But this has been a very interesting conversation. I'm glad you convened it. But
Thanks, Carol.
I'm going to sign off now.
Ari, before I go to you, Carol, can I just share one update? Rebecca and I meet every other month with the leaders from the business community. And they're interested on the flip side of that coin. How do we do more? And so some of the ideas they had are hosting a de-escalation and trauma-informed interactions training for business owners. So I connected them with Chris Eilers and Kay McDonald from the Oregon, or it's Older Adult Behavioral Health Initiative, because they do trainings like that. They're contracted to do it. And so they're going to host one. So the business community leaders are going to host a training this fall probably, and they're going to make it more of like a happy hour at a fun kind of business restaurant environment, to try to draw in as big a crowd as they can from the business community, to have all their, you know, frontline staff, cashiers, everybody, when there's a situation, how do you de-escalate? I'm going to help provide a flyer that Allison's Daytime Drop-In Center put together of like, you know, a threefold flyer of what resources are there. How do we have that on site at different businesses? So they really are, at least from my perspective, making an effort to do what they can to treat folks as human and de-escalate, connect to resources, not have to call 911, and also try to help some of the impact that's happening to their businesses that is also really difficult sometimes.
Will the library be invited to that?
That was the question that I had for them. If there is room in whatever forum they get, and they, you know, let's say 30 business folks want to come and there's a capacity for 60, we have heard that bus drivers and librarians and other city and county sort of public facing staff would really love access to something like that. So that's a follow-up after they get a forum.
That would be really key because they deal with it all the time.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Thanks.
cool.
Ari.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, kind of just to reiterate the importance of the educational component in terms of the barriers to housing, the catch-22 nature of it, the evictions, the incarcerations, the example someone gave today about getting a citation that they've never had any trouble with the law before, and things that kind of turn into that downward spiral, kind of more education on that piece, that it makes it virtually impossible for people on their own to secure housing. So I think that would be helpful for the community to really kind of get educated into that kind of little bit of a weedy part of it, because I don't think people really realize, like, it just becomes impossible when you get caught in that cycle to pull yourself out of it and get and secure housing from a landlord who would be willing to give it to you with all those barriers. So I think it would be a great thing to kind of highlight in terms of the educational piece.
Well, I'm thinking too of what we heard in the local planning group meetings from our providers about, hey, here's the barrier, not one barrier, but the 5 that I'm seeing for this one person. Yeah, Cade.
I was just gonna add, like, agree, and with what Carol was sharing too, like with the educational component. I mean, even just hearing about that person's experience that you talked to, I think was really compelling. And whether it's at you know, that business meeting, or if we have like a once a year thing, like having an actual person with lived experience like share their story, I think could be really compelling in terms of like making that real. It's one thing to hear, you know, from a clinician or a provider, like these are the structural barriers, you know. But when you hear like someone's story, even like that, like you know, your hands are in the air and, you know, what Carol was saying, like there's a disconnect in like people's understanding and like compassion.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a way we can incorporate if anyone's willing or, you know, to share something like that in those spaces.
I wonder, because we've had our whole board members who've experienced homelessness share very honestly, and I just have so much respect for that. And I wonder, if maybe there's an opportunity for like Allison or Alita or somebody else in the community to tune into the H.O.P.E meeting at a location where they're working with different folks. Because, you know, asking someone to come in person or to, you know, join with their own laptop is a barrier in and of itself. But I also am just really sensitive to respecting that person's time and the stigma associated with it. And so I'm thinking maybe some of the success stories that
Yeah.
Kaylee has highlighted in the newsletter that have come from COI or Corvallis Housing First, inviting them to join virtually. They're not currently in that place anymore, but they.
That's what I'm kind of envisioning,
Yeah.
like someone who's hopefully got out of the situation, but can speak to their experience. I mean, even I could share what my experience was like. I don't want to just be like, oh, I'll do it, but I mean, I could, like.
Well, and you have before, we have had our H.O.P.E members before too, and so, what do you think, Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, having H.O.P.E helping with community education, because it gets, so not only do providers have to do the services, try to get the services, get the funding to provide the services, do the outreach to the population, and then educate the public about the issues that we're facing, it's overwhelming. And so having help with, you know, educating the community about some of the challenges, which really come down to fairly, you know, they're complex stories, but simple causes, like we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough behavioral health options for people, we don't have enough addictions, treatment centers, that kind of thing. But, you know, kind of easing the burden of that, I think would be helpful. So, yeah, that's good.
Other input from folks who are joining virtually. Ari, I see your hand is still up, but that might be from before.
Yeah, I didn't put it down, but I do have one more thing to say, because people were talking about also families. And so the additional barrier of having a small amount of income and maybe having, like you said, 4 children or 5 children, and not being able to get rent an apartment or a house from a landlord because you have too many children and they don't want to rent to you. They won't rent a 2-bedroom house if you have 4 children to someone with a 2-bedroom house, but that person cannot afford, you know, a 4-bedroom house. And so I think that, you know, speaks a lot to homeless families and, you know, one of the causes and barriers to their finding housing as well.
We could invite a specific couple of folks who work with families to talk about that. And I guess I'll ask sort of a prompting question. You know, when I think about like, what community education do we need? I think about, you know, like family dinners at holidays, and when I hear like an aunt or an uncle say, or I'm like, oh, I just would really love to sit down with you for like 2 hours and educate you about this topic. What are you seeing out in your community networks where you're like, God, I wish I could just direct someone to come to the November H.O.P.E meeting where we'll have an hour on this topic and then they can learn about.
What I think what you described there is even part of building the public visibility is also preparing a forum like the H.O.P.E Advisory Board to be comfortable with people who are just getting into this topic. And that might be people who don't have the vocabulary, don't, you know, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of fear still because it's just something that is not, you know, it's cognitive dissonance for them. They're not. So, you know, what could possibly help a H.O.P.E Advisory Board, a group of people become more prepared for inviting maybe some people who wouldn't necessarily want to volunteer to be on the board, but would love to come and talk, but at the same time could create a dynamic that would be challenging. And so what would we need as a community group to be prepared to invite people who are very new and might have conflicting perspectives on this, but that would be the first step to have that conversation. Courageous conversation, basically.
Mhm.
Good point, because that's definitely would be a reality of
Right.
letting the public have a voice about the situation, like, which is we want, but there is inevitably going to, if there's an outlet to share frustration or anger, you're absolutely right, like, we'll run into that,
The
so.
first 3 H.O.P.E meetings were like that.
Mhm.
Good forming, storming and norming.
No solutions, but it's a good point to, yeah, bring into the imagining that.
Bria, I see you are on virtually. Do you have thoughts about community education topics that would be helpful, inviting? And are you at a place where you can share? And Catherine Bisco, you've had some great ideas about this before. I'd love to hear any thoughts you have.
Well, you know me, there's a number of things going through my head all the way through. This has been a really helpful meeting, and I appreciate all of our feedback from our other county partners, as well as just this kind of conversation that we're having. A couple thoughts are, a future priority maybe that we should be talking about is how do we collectively get together and find some solutions to our warming and cooling shelter needs for our homeless community. That's a little bit off topic, but it's bounced in on my mind a couple of times. I don't see everybody on the screen, so I'm not sure who mentioned it, but we were talking about holidays and for families individuals that are experiencing homelessness. That's just a hard time it's a hard time for people generally. But if you're homeless and experiencing any number of the situations around homelessness that can be amplified due to that nature. And how, Philomath, I know it's a smaller community, but Philomath in the past, Harriet's Housing actually would host holiday meals here. And so do we have resources to, we talk about sitting down, listening to people. What better place than breaking bread and sharing time with individuals and building relationships? Is there a way to toss around some ideas of who are our community partners? Can we resource something that serves multiple purposes with some of our community members, both that are in leadership roles and those that are on boards and advising positions, are elected officials, and those experiencing exactly these barriers, and make it open enough that anybody who's not in maybe some of our programs that we have already. So those folks that kind of slip between the cracks, those are good space to engage with them as well. When you talk about H.O.P.E outreach, I was taking some notes. So Carol Butcher had some good comments about the types of questions that we continue to have to either combat as misinformation or, people aren't seeing. I think Ari, you were mentioning, what's actually happening. Sometimes I was just at Open Streets this week with another organization this past week, and sometimes just being there in that space puts you in front of an audience that wouldn't typically show up at one of these meetings, for example. So is something like that an option? Is, a double-sided flyer of, why do people become homelessness? I think Carol said, why don't people clean up their, I don't know if you said junk, but, the mess is a challenge. What are those situations like? Some of those demographics, are there ways that we can get out in the community? So again, I'm just kind of throwing a lot of stuff on the barn wall right now. I really appreciate everybody and the work that they're doing in their respective spaces, but this group always is fun to come to and brainstorm and what's next and how do we move on from there. And I'll just toss one more out there is, do we have, so Peggy McGuire leaving today because of a very unexpected, it's not like there was a burning fire up there. Short notice, short response. What's our evacuation planning for our homeless community, both our partners and those that are living outside unsheltered? Have we talked about that? And I don't know that we have. So
But there are specific plans and strategies for folks living without a house or, a method to be updated. And that came out of the 2020 August fires. And so Lauren, who is one of your counterparts in emergency management, There are some specific plans for different subpopulations, older folks who live at home and have a landline. And don't see updates, they don't get the cell phone, update of it's time to evacuate. So there are those, and I think that's a great educational component. We could invite somebody to come. Can I ask Eric, do you have any ideas on this? No,
Nothing that you just said, no more than what you just mentioned.
okay.
So,
Maybe we need a hope to the farmer's market visibility.
Well, I saw the Corvallis Housing First post, at the farmer's market, and I know it's an idea that came out of the subcommittee group that met with Kaylee last year, after she was onboarded, of how do we improve communications? Could we go to the farm? And Anita Earl was like, I'll take flyers to the farmer's market, set me up with a booth. And would love to have some breathing room to do stuff like that. This summer has been a summer.
The great ideas that we've captured all this. Catherine, we met a while back at the executive committee meeting, just a lot of those ideas you're putting out. We definitely have those documented in the notes, and just wanted to bring it to this bigger group, and a lot of great ideas today.
Carol, did you have more you wanted to add?
Oh, you're on mute.
Carol, you're muted.
There we are. Just as well, because I was stuttering. So I think also the OSU student population, I think people aren't aware of how many students are, well, certainly not getting enough food, but also are sleeping in their cars. It's all just finding different segments of the population with almost, do you see this person? You realize this person sleeping, little photographs. And somebody at one point was going around with permission, taking pictures of homeless people with a brief caption about how they became homeless. I don't remember who was doing it. It was sort of an idea that worked, and was Catherine doing that? But it really shocked people, because they'd see these regular looking people who looked like they were just hanging out, and it turned out that they were living in their car and were using shelters for showers and stuff like that. Okay, I'm done again.
Catherine, were you gonna chime in on that?
Yeah, just to that point, maybe it was this. So Melissa Bird was the speaker or coordinator at something. I think it was at Whiteside Theater. Yeah, okay, so head nodding. That was very, very powerful. It's a while back now, so it was pre-pandemic, but that particular presentation was very, very, very powerful. And I'm wondering, so again, a little bit bigger space, a community expo, like all of our homeless partners, who's there, put a face to a name, tabling with those folks. Is it possible to put something like that together? Is it possible to have a, light free food event? Carol brings up the good point about our student population. So I know that too, that Linn Benton Community College, I know OSU does, but Linn Benton Community College also has some of their student leadership folks working on food and housing insecurity. And that's a bigger issue than generally we see. Matter of fact, maybe a student representative specifically to our colleges would be a good thing to talk about for this advising board as well, because that's a much bigger space than I had realized.
Yeah, and LBCC gave great, incredible, robust data when we did the initial H.O.P.E data collection, with a real overrepresented amount of folks who are trans at LBCC, and people fleeing domestic violence, and living in their cars. So these are great ideas, and I'm in real good touch with the folks at OSU's Basic Needs Center, to maybe have a representative from each of those come and say, what is student homelessness looking like? What resources are there? But when you were talking about an expo, Joel, I'm glad you're still here, because I believe that there's going to be a resource expo upcoming sometime in the next year, that your team helps to coordinate. Am I still right about that?
Yes, not in the next year, in the next few months, on October 10th at 10 a.m. between 10 and 2. So 10:10 at 10. We didn't do that on purpose. It just worked out. It was the Corvallis Area Resource Event. So we're going to have hopefully several dozen service providers attend as a one-stop shop for anyone in need, whether it's regarding housing, somebody in need of veteran services, mental health, whatever it might be. Samaritan will be there with their ability to help people with some needs. They can stop by, sort of look around, see what it might be that they need help with, get engaged with those services, and hopefully carry on from there to a better condition.
Joel, once you
Can I-
have or something like that, can you send it on so I can be sure to share it with everybody?
Yeah, let me, I have a copy of the flyer. Let me see if I can put it in the chat.
Oh, great. Sorry to cut you off, Catherine.
That was exactly my ask. I'd love to see something pre-canned so it can go out to all of our networks, our Facebooks and our community partners as well. Thank you. And glad to hear that. I was not aware of that.
It's just for my understanding real quick, is it, expo that you were describing, Catherine, are you thinking that that's something that our greater community would come to learn about the situation versus people seeking specific resources going? Because I think there's kind of a two components here, is one, making sure we get people connected to the services they need, but also the educational component about who's in our community doing this work.
So I would allow that to evolve based on, maybe what this group and some of the key individuals are looking at. I think there's value to both. Certainly, I know, in that space of, hey, a nice free meal is a good deal if you have limited resources and you're kind of living on that edge. And finding resources, matter of fact, I was just looking at the free clothing events at a couple of our churches tomorrow in Corvallis and Albany, and remembering what that means to folks that were being served by Philomath Community Services, for example. So those types of things and where they are and where they happen, those are very helpful. At the same token, I think it's important to know who our partners are, and we have bounced in and out of that space a number of times with the H.O.P.E Advisory Board. But does everybody else know? So going back to Carol's, conversations or any number of us, the people that we engage with, we kind of know what's going on, but is it trickling down to that next circle of folks? Are we getting the information out there? So there's two reasons for that. One is it helps address some of the perceptions and things that is happening in our community. They recognize that things are happening, but also that's that opportunity to find that next volunteer or that next program or that next idea, right? We're talking to people that are interested that may not even know what's going on and who the people are at the table.
Thanks, Catherine. We want to be respectful of folks' time. It's 6 o'clock. These were wonderful ideas. And Eric, thank you for coming out here from Albany. I'm assuming that's where you came from.
Yeah.
Okay. This was really, really helpful feedback for me, as far as educational components and what I can work on and bring to the executive committee to decide for upcoming, agenda items. Oh, thank you, Joel. I will email out, the flyer and I can include it in the meeting materials that we post online too. Thank you, everyone. And, we'll see you next month. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good night for folks who are virtual. Paula, are you good on everything you need? I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.
Yeah, I'm good, Julie. I got everything.
Okay, great.
Thank